Hello,
Buongiorno.
gentlemen. So this is me, alt monarchist, and my co-host, not a spy. And we got some very interesting topic today. We're discussing cringe Protestants and the current situation that's going on in Israel.
It's bad. It's
Yes.
bad. I've seen some more awful takes in the past 48 hours than I've seen like all month. Straight up. Oh, there's so many bad takes.
Hey, have you seen that movie Smoking Aces? The first
It
one,
sounds familiar.
not
I
the
don't
cringe,
know.
not
No,
the cringe sequel, but the first one.
no,
So
no.
near the end of the movie, one of the mercenaries, he's talking to another mercenary. He's like, "Oh, is that where y'all? Oh, sorry, not mercenaries. Sorry, assassins. Like,
Mm.
and a competing assassin, like another rival assassin group, right? He's talking to him. He goes, "Oh, is that who y'all are here for? Israel?" And like, yeah, like it's like in the opening of the stream when I said Israel, it kind of reminded me of that scene from that movie.
Mm.
Is
Mhm.
that who y'all are here for? Israel? Like it kind of sounds like those Protestant preachers from down south.
Yep.
God
Yeah.
bless the nation of Israel.
It, it's it's funny seeing. So for those who are not really oh not educated on the situation, that sounds really trite. I don't mean that in a bad way, because everyone's got more important things to worry about. For the people who aren't as familiar, there we go, aren't as familiar with the situation, Hamas, which is the Palestinian resistance group, they're doing stuff against Israel, and a lot of people are like, "Oh my God, we as Christians have to support Israel," not knowing that Hamas is actually pro-Christian. It's on their PR website. It's a trash website, so it takes like 10 minutes to load, but they have it clearly stated. And since their founding, they've favored the King Baldwin option, which, if you're not familiar with that, that's kind of like a peaceful coexistence between everyone in the Holy Land, because the Holy Land is so it's the Holy Land. It's not just for Christians. It's not just for uh, Hebrews. It, there's not like a word that's not politically charged for Israelis. Oh well, Israelis. It's a Holy Land for everyone. Um, and King Baldwin kind of supported like a peaceful coexistence option, even back in the medieval era.
Okay, yeah. So think about King Baldwin though. Like I still think like a because he was a Christian. He's a
Yes,
papist, and no offense, Roman
careful with that
Catholics.
word, sir.
No offense to my Roman Catholic friends. But yeah, but Hamas, I'd say like their approach is probably more like, despite being Islamic, I still think it's probably more secular in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. It's more along like the because they are a religious fundamentalist. They're a fundamentalist sect, but they're not like they're not as secular as Saddam, but they're not as religious as like Iran.
Mhm. Okay, so they're kind of like in between.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're very in the middle,
Hmm.
which as a group from the Holy Land, that's what you would expect, you know. They have to
Hmm.
deal with everybody coming and going. So um as much as familiarity
Yeah.
breeds contempt, they're pretty reasonable.
Well, what's
Uh,
interesting is that so King Baldwin still ruled Jerusalem, and not just Jerusalem, but all that part of Judea, right?
yes,
Um,
yes,
uh,
Palestine, Palestine.
well, today it's Palestine, yes, but
Yes,
back,
no, it was the Roman province of
yes,
Palestine.
yes, true.
That's what I'm referring to.
True. So basically, well, that area of Palestine, so from Jerusalem to all those surrounding regions, right,
Hmm.
of what we know as modern day Israel, that used to be called the Kingdom of Jerusalem under King Baldwin.
This is true.
And like what's interesting, despite being a theocracy, right, it's a monarchical theocracy. Despite being that, for some reason, the Muslims were able to coexist peacefully. Even some of the Jews were able to coexist peacefully, right? And like the Christians, they coexisted peacefully with everybody else there, right? And despite the fact that it was still a Christian monarchical theocracy, right?
And it's
And
very successful under King
yes,
Baldwin, mind you. It was kind of the
mhm,
golden age of the Kingdom of Israel, or of
yeah.
Jerusalem.
Well, what's interesting, like even when the Muslims conquered the second Rome, Constantinople, right? Despite the fact that Muslims in other areas would force Christians to pay jizyas, Christians were allowed to kind of remain Christians in Constantinople, well,
Mhm.
what the Muslims would call Istanbul. But Constantinople, it still had a lot of the Christian culture. Even today, Istanbul has a lot of Turks who are still Orthodox. They're part of the Orthodox Church, and despite the fact that they were like renowned, I say they were a theocratic republic, but before they used to be a theocratic monarchy, right? And despite it being a theocratic monarchy, for example, like the Russian Tsars, they used to be under the Greek Orthodox Church for a long time, and the Russian Tsars just got tired of constantly sailing to the Islamic lands just to speak to their own patriarch, right? So they eventually got permission to create their own Moscow patriarch and so on. But before we go off, so like I don't want us to go off topic. So I'll just kind of like to bring up this point that what's interesting is that like a religious theocracy does not necessarily violate the rights of other religious people.
No, often
Like it,
far less than than
what's
Democrat.
interesting is that it's the democracies that are constantly offending religious people, constantly
Mhm.
attacking religious people. And when I say religious people, I'm not just saying one particular group. I mean any religion, right? And when you think about it, religious groups hate each other while living under democracy. They cannot coexist.
Yes, absolutely. I would wager so far as to say that one of the reasons that happens is because the desecularization of law, the absence of blasphemy laws. Um, because and people will hate me for this statement, but I'm going to hold to it. Are Islamic blasphemy laws in Europe not great? Yeah, but it makes them happy, and they don't. When there are blasphemy laws that go both ways, when Christians don't insult Muslims, and when Muslims don't insult Christians, they tend to coexist peacefully. It's just a reality of the situation that when people that insult each other on something as important as religion, um, when they're prevented from doing that, and when they stay civil with each other, people coexist without issue.
And usually that coexistence is guaranteed by a religious theocracy, right?
Yes.
So yes, under an Islamic theocracy, Christians would have some sort of limitations, some sort of not maybe like full rights, but still they exist, right?
Mhm.
And the same thing, under a Christian theocracy, Muslims, they're allowed to exist, but they gotta still abide by certain governmental rules enforced by the Christians. But at the same time, they could still be Muslims, right?
Yes.
And they kind of could live in their own separate communities and so forth. But while like secular Europe, like what they've done this kind of weird thing. They first tried to pander to the Muslims, and now they're out of control, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
basically forcing people to kind of accept like a way of life that they're not used to. Well, here's the thing, Europe, if you did not become secular, how you guys remained Christian theocrats, you guys would have prevented any Muslims from entering your countries the way they've entered them. You would have made sure that like there would have been an Islamic minority in your country, not an Islamic, I don't know, not a majority, but still a large minority now, right?
Yes.
Basically,
Very,
it's the
very large.
secular constitutional style governments that actually creates like more of this, how do you say, kind of radical religious enforcement rather than kind of more peaceful religious coexistence among others. There has to
Yes.
be some kind of religious theocracy at the top level first to kind of calm everybody else down on the bottom.
Yeah. Democracies are very, very blind to man is a spiritual being. Man needs religion. That sounds bad when I put it that way, but you know what I mean. Religion and man have existed since day one, and for a very good reason. And when you have these governments who look at qualms that different sects have different religions. Even in Christianity, there's sectarian conflict. When it looks at these and just says, no, there's no, you guys just need to hold hands and sing kumbaya. Like, that's not how people work. I'm sorry, but that's not how people work. And it almost it tries to ignore differences until they become too much of an issue, and then they boil over, and then bad things happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, like the Russian Empire, for example, they were an Orthodox monarchy, and the state and the church were equal. Now, the state did not go above the church did not go above the state. It's just that there were some laws that were simply for religious people. They should deal with it. They should have their own courts and all that stuff, right? And then there's secular stuff where the secular government deals with, so forth, right? Like murder. Obviously, the secular government, that's their jurisdiction, right? But like what's interesting is that in the Russian Empire, you had this religious you had this religious monarchy, right? And you had Muslims in the Russian Empire. You had different sorts of Christians in the Russian Empire. People assume, oh, well, it was Orthodox. Yes, majority, but you had a Protestant minority that existed. You had a Roman Catholic minority that existed. There are many Lutherans that were in the Russian Empire. And what's interesting is that like the Russian military was able to accommodate all these groups. For example, like whenever there's like a prayer or like a blessing done for the troops, there'll be a certain blessing for the Orthodox troops, which were the majority. Then like there are Protestant soldiers amongst them. They'll bring in like a Lutheran priest to bless all the Protestants. And if there were some Jewish soldiers, they'll have a rabbi bless them. And if there was a group of soldiers, they'll bless the Muslims, right? So, like under a religious theocracy, though, what's interesting, you have this unity, right? And also the Austro-Hungarian Empire, like they had this like kind of religious theocracy, not completely, but still like there's religion present in their government. So it's still a religious government. So you could say it was a Christian government, and yet they kind of were fine with certain minorities to a certain extent.
To an extent, yes.
Until 1914. But yeah, but like
That's it.
yeah, but my main point is that like we could still have a religious theocracy and still get along fine with other religions, right? And this kind of goes back to what you said with Hamas. By the way, you mentioned the website. There's also another statement that was sent out like yesterday that Hamas gave orders to their troops to not harm any Christian churches or monasteries. And by Christian, for them Christians, the local Catholics there, the local Orthodox that are there, right?
Yep. Catholic, Orthodox,
because in the Middle East, basically Orthodox Catholics, they're obviously Christian. They have the cross like right there. Mm-hmm. If there are any Protestants in that area, I don't know if they're so obvious with their symbolism.
Yeah, well, I mean, people are always really confused why Protestants don't have crosses in their churches. There tends to be, a lot less.
Depends where you go to. Depends on the Protestant church you go to.
This is true, yeah. But primarily, I'm talking about the non-denominationals who have the like. Have you ever been to one of their services?
Many times, because I'm a former Protestant. So unfortunately, I used to visit a lot of those cringe churches.
I was in a relationship with a girl who was one of those, and I grew up Catholic, and it was the first time I'd ever went to one of those, and I walked in, I was like, where's the crosses? Where's the stained glass? Why does this look like a convention center? You have a coffee shop here? What on earth? And then their whole thing was like a guy on a guitar, just like it was like a concert almost. Mm-hmm. And I was completely taken aback, just major culture shock.
Yes. So, well, like a thing with Protestantism, it's basically lack of true, proper historical teachings. Like they don't have any, like they're not interested in a lot of that stuff too. And if they are, they start to distort like the fathers. They distort what they have to say. They would quote mine or cherry pick what the church
Yeah,
fathers would say.
and
And
they tend to, since they're practice sola scriptura,
oops, I dropped something.
um, yeah, since they practice sola scriptura, they tend to be very ignorant to church history, and on top of that, it's not, they don't. I'm just going to come out with a hot take. They don't praise God; they praise themselves. They're a very me kind of religion, and I just can't wrap I know my brain is small, but I still cannot wrap it around that.
Well, like when I look at my Protestant past, I start to realize, wait a minute, a lot of it was just about me.
Mm-hmm.
At first, it doesn't seem that way when you're Protestant because you were never Protestant, so you probably like don't know this
Yeah.
experience. But like at first, you don't notice this as a Protestant, but then like when you are done being Protestant and you become, let's say, Orthodox, you start to look at your past and you start to realize, wait a minute, I was very prideful. I was well, it was just about my pride and my ego the entire time. And that's what it is. It's about feeling good. And that's why it always feels good for them to constantly promote Israel, to constantly, what's interesting they want to go back to the Old Testament ways a lot. They'll quote mine the Old Testament a lot in a lot of their services, and they'll use that as justification for Israel, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of Protestants don't know this little secret is that the church is Israel, not some place in Palestine called Israel. Like the church, like the God's people are Israel. We are the church. The Apostle
Yeah.
Paul straight up said, "You are the seed of Abraham." Of course, they call it that's replacement theology. But no, this was not called replacement theology originally. This was just basic theology, basic church theology. That's what it was.
Yeah.
As modern day Zionist Protestants decided to call common church theology replacement theology.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a theologian by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, I'm a historian and an amateur analyst, as I've mentioned before. But even I, a absolute peasant at theology, understands that the New Test or the New Covenant kind of happened, and that's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, Apparently, I have to remind people about that. Apparently, a lot of Protestants forget that the New Covenant happened and
Yes.
the Old Covenant
Well,
was done away with.
like the old covenants basically, how do you say it? Like it got transferred into like the new covenant, basically. We're continuing, like we're the continuation of the old covenant, basically.
Yes.
Right. So like Israel, like those promises that are made to Abraham, well, those are for us now. Right.
Yes.
So because the
Not
Apostle Paul
the
says
people that it was made before.
well, like because well, if you look at like in the New Testament, originally the first Christians, they were only like this small tiny Jewish sect, and they assumed that it was only for them. But if you
Oh,
heard
really?
about Cornelius, the first Roman to convert to Christianity,
Yes.
uh, he basically talks to Peter, and then and then eventually the Christians realize, oh, it's not just for us, it's for the Gentiles too. Okay, we get it. So that's when like they start
Mm.
the whole missionary movement. You have the stories of the Ethiopian eunuch converting to Christianity. By the way, it was very easy for the Ethiopian eunuch to convert to Christianity because the Ethiopians, according to tradition, have already adopted the Jewish religion before. And then when one of the forgot his name because it wasn't Thomas, Philip, it was the Apostle Philip. He explained to the eunuch, well, this book that you're reading about Isaiah, it's about Jesus Christ. It's a prophecy about Jesus. And the eunuch, being a convert to Judaism, is thinking, oh, okay, this makes sense. So it's about this man Jesus you talked about. Let's go get baptized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's not fair to call it replacement theology because the Protestant Zionists, they assume that we're just trying to just replace people who are ethnically Hebrew, right?
Hmm.
Well, which we're not. We're simply saying, like, people who reject Christ, most Hebrews do, right? Uh,
Yes.
they're not part of this promise, right? It no longer applies to them, right? So the Apostle Paul, he writes, there are no more Greek nor Jew, right? And like it's basically saying we're all one in Christ. Basically, we are part of the seed of Abraham now, and the seed has been transferred to the Gentiles. Then, like somewhere, I think it's the book of Ezekiel. There's like a small, tiny passage that mentions like a vision that Ezekiel has, like of the future, and he sees Gentile priests worshiping God in the temple, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, and like, and today in the church, we have priests doing a lot of stuff that are simple to the old, that are similar to the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
Because we are that continuation. Like we never, like basically the New Testament like never stopped also coinciding with the Old Testament. We inherit, we're the continuation of the Old Testament in that
Yeah.
sense. So we never stopped, like kind of, how to say, like we never stopped following God's laws, but the people who are of a certain ethnicity who reject Christ, they're no longer part of that covenant. They're no longer part of the new covenant. They're not part of the New Testament or the Old Testament anymore. Like
Yeah.
they're like thrown away.
I have noticed in my
Yeah.
discussions with Protestants that they can't like they do view there's like a hard stop between Old and New Testament
Mm-hmm.
because God changed. It's like what? Huh? Okay. Because they can't rationalize a lot of them. They can't wrap their head around
Well, what's
Old
interesting is
Testament
that God
God.
like never changed. He's always the same. Like he never changed though.
Yeah. Yes. It's they see Old Testament God as a sort of different entity than New Testament God. It's like no, it's the same dude. It's the same dude, people. It's just uh, people were kind of dummies and they kept ignoring what he told them to do many, many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time he would more or less say, I will help. Misfortune will befall you if you do XYZ. And then they do XYZ and then misfortune befalls them.
Oh
It's
yes,
like,
like the Babylonian Empire taking them over, and
yeah, yeah,
sending them into exile. Modern day Jews, for example, if they truly want to be actual Jews, they would convert to the church.
yeah,
like
yeah,
like they would actually want to, like, if they want to return to the so-called Old Testament period, well, become part of the church. Don't join some weird non-denominational cringe fest. No, you should join the church, the apostolic church set by Jesus Christ.
say, have you seen, speaking of non-denominational cringe fests, have you seen there's a non-denominational sect in Texas who just recently did a sermon made by AI?
Oh yes, yes, I remember that one. Yes.
So actually, when I ran into a pretty nice young man around here, we kind of became buddies. We hang out and talk every now and then, and he was like one day he was like, "Hey, you should come with me to my church," and I thought, "Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely." My friend is like, "Come to my church." Yeah, that's a very nice thing to do.
Mhm.
And so I went, and it was the exact same sect. And their whole sermon that day was about, I kind of laugh when I say this, and because it just sounds completely unbelievable, and you're probably going to giggle a bit when you hear it too. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be a better person. You don't have to improve yourself, and you don't have to be holy because Christ died for our sins.
Oh
You
yeah.
don't. They legitimately believe that you could do whatever you wanted because Christ died for our sins. Whatever you wanted. Emphasis on that. It was so like I almost stood up and walked out that moment when he said that.
Well,
Absolutely took me.
well, like thing is, a lot of Protestants they reject the works salvation.
Mhm.
Basically in the Bible it says to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. It says to work it out.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm familiar with the whole thing
yeah,
about like,
then
oh, you
it,
don't need to do works.
yeah. Well,
Delusional.
and the Apostle James says, work without, sorry, faith that works is dead.
Hmm. Yeah, but you got to cherry pick. You only
Well,
read the parts that you can
yeah.
read.
Well, like basically, that's why they cherry pick their support for Israel too. They'll cherry pick
Yeah.
parts of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. They'll cherry pick all those, and they'll say this is all interconnected. This has something to do with modern day Israel.
So just this year, actually, the Israeli government made it illegal to preach about Christianity and
Hmm.
Christ in the street,
Okay.
which is, not a good look. And then on top of that, the whole reason Hamas is doing this thing, they call this Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, because if you're familiar with the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, there it's a very, very, very holy site to Islam. Um, there were hundreds, I believe it was 360 in one event. 360 Israelis stormed it and they were trying to desecrate it. And the Israeli police were arresting people, Christians and Muslims, who were trying to stop that. Because in Jerusalem, most people have a general understanding of we all want to be here, we all want to be faithful. Let's just not kill each other. But
Hmm.
some people don't believe that. And the Israeli police in Jerusalem were, like I said, helping these extremists storm
Hmm.
houses of worship. And they've done this to Christians too. This is not just a unique thing, just that they've done to Islam. They've done this to Christians. They've desecrated many, many churches. And the Israeli police will stand aside and they'll often arrest people who step in and try
Hmm.
to prevent this. So over the past few years, I mean, it could have been, as far as I know, this could have been going on for decades. But I just know that over the past few years, the rights of Christians in Israel have been getting
Hmm.
very much trampled on.
Now that you mentioned all of that, um, I do remember actually, when we Orthodox we celebrated Easter, right?
Hmm.
And so there is a very holy fire that comes down in Israel that the Orthodox Christians, like we see, like I've never been there personally to witnesses. I saw the videos of the whole holy ritual, and there's a holy fire that comes down and like lights up, and like people like I saw a video where a guy he's putting the fire on his beard and it's not burning his beard, nothing. Like he would put like his hand on the fire and he's not burning. And it's a
Yeah.
very miraculous event for Christians, especially Orthodox Christians. And I do remember, now that you reminded me of all this stuff, I do remember actually the Israeli police were attacking Christians who were going to that event. This
Hmm.
happened this year in 2023. And I remember like it was called like the Bloody Sunday Massacre. Like and like they're attacking Christians, like they're physically abusing them. I saw the videos. I remember watching the videos where they were being abused. They're being attacked by the police. The police were trying to stop the Christians from going to this holy event that the Christians have every year on Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was basically it's our Orthodox Easter Sunday, basically.
Ah, okay.
And so this holy event, the holy fire comes down, and the holy sepulcher, the holy fire comes down, and we for us Orthodox that is a miracle. And the Israeli police, they were attacking Christians who were going to that event. They're attacking old
Mhm.
women. Like imagine a bunch of old women going try and go to church, and you're a cop, and you're like, "Oh yeah, you're not going there, Granny. Through over my dead body, you old woman." Right? Like imagine something like that going on in
Yeah.
America.
I mean, it's coming to America, unfortunately, because
I
I
tried to
know
explain
there's,
to Protestants that like Israel is literally attacking Christians over there
yeah, and it's not a new
on
thing.
a holy day.
Yeah, it's not a new thing. I mean, if you really want to get into the weeds of it, that's how the entire place came to be because they performed terrorism against Americans and English. They literally invented modern terrorism.
Mhm.
I believe it was the Beirut barracks bombing. I think that was the one. And I know the King
didn't
David
Ben-Gurion
Hotel.
didn't Ben-Gurion admit to like creating like a lot of false flags just to get
Yeah,
support for
yeah.
Israel?
I might be misspeaking about the Beirut barracks bombing. I know that one was a bunch of Marines got blown up, but I didn't know that the King David Hotel bombing was actually done by Zionist terrorists,
Hmm.
and they did it against Christians just because that's how they operate. That's their MO, and that's been their MO since their country was founded. There were better times, there were worse times. But the thing is, like, people see that and they want to just completely blame it just on Israel. Israel is a very socially split country, mind you. There are groups of Jewish people who are against that, actually. I believe the
Hmm.
Orthodox are against that. They tend to be lacking power, though, because
You mean Orthodox Jews, not Orthodox Christians?
yes, Orthodox
Okay.
Jews, if I remember right. So I should have specified that. I believe the Orthodox Jews are actually quite against that, because they're far more understanding of how much that angers people. And like, Israel is not a unitary country.
Hmm.
very unstable. I believe they had a constitutional crisis just this year, didn't they?
Yeah.
Was a constitutional crisis. They didn't know who was in charge exactly. People wanted to get rid of Netanyahu, and then it kind of worked itself out. But there's just because it worked itself out then does not mean that those issues are still not present. And as I mentioned before, it is still a very unstable country. In typical democratic fashion, it's an unstable country.
Yeah, so it's not as democratic as people think it is.
True. Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that democracies are not really as democratic as they claim to be. Like most democracies are actually like anti-democracy
Mm-hmm. On the
because
base premise.
yeah,
Yes.
like democracy, here are the set rules of democracy. But as soon as democracy is established, you have to kind of violate certain rules just to preserve the system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe it was Slavoj Žižek who talked about uh, there's contradictions in every. I don't like Zizek because he's a Marxist, but he does have a lot of good points. And he talked about how there's contradictions in societies, and the older, more decrepit they get, the more the contradictions build up until eventually said contradictions bring the place crashing down. And that is kind of what happens in democracies, where it starts out, it could very well start out as a legitimate democracy, very well intended, very well governed. But as it grows, you often hear this term deep state brought up. It's kind of like that in premise, to where as it grows, there are these cobwebs, these structural cobwebs, which encase the democracy. And the cobwebs eventually end up being the only thing that holds it together because democracy can only exist in like an ethno state, in a 100% pure ethno state.
Well, even then, like I think that ethno state will still fail because democracy breeds corruption.
Yes.
So like you could have your ethno state last, I don't know, maybe 100 years, right? But like
Yep.
what will lead to the destruction of your own democracy is the fact that you have corrupt people within your
Mm-hmm.
government who are elected by a bunch of imbeciles,
Yes.
right? And then these imbeciles elect these corrupt politicians, and then on top of that, some politicians are corrupt, some politicians are genuine imbeciles. They're not even corrupt; they're just straight up
Yep.
imbeciles. And so you have this weird combination of these people ruling your country, and like they could be easily bought, bribed, paid
Yep.
for by corporations, and then like boom, like they could pass laws to enact they could pass more laws to kind of keep them in power, so they'll kind of allow other people to vote. They'll allow more foreigners to vote. They'll allow your enemies to vote, right? For example,
It's naturally fractious.
it
Humans are
started.
naturally
Well,
fractious.
it started in the 1700s here in America, right? You had the Revolutionary War. You create a republic, right? And at first, white male landowners could vote, and then they kind of eased up the laws. And I think only
They
white
couldn't even
guys
agree
could
on
vote.
that.
Yeah,
That's the funny thing.
then eventually only black men and white men can vote, right?
Yep.
And then like and then all of a sudden women could vote, right? And
Yep.
then just got, and actually what's interesting is that like the more voting rights they gave to people, the worse it got in this country.
Mhm. Yes. I always laugh when Americans think that the Civil War was the only one that happened. No, there were a lot right after the Revolutionary War. Even Shays' Rebellion happened.
Yes, the
The
Whiskey
War,
Rebellion.
yeah, the
Yes,
Whiskey Rebellion.
yeah,
And these were all because you had people and yes, you are very correct bringing it up. It's a republic, not a democracy. But these were all because people could not like, oh, we'll have no tax. And then they're like, well, okay, the Federalists say we should have tax now, so we'll
mhm,
put it in the whiskey tax. And then
yeah,
there's a civil war over it.
yeah.
Like,
Well, yeah, what's interesting is that like in order for a republic to be preserved, they had to kind of violate the principles of a republic.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Same thing with democracy. Like that's why I say democracies today are completely anti-democracy. They're actually going against their own democratic principles just to say that they're democratic.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
Israel is definitely a good example of this. They're
Mhm.
the only democracy in the Middle East, yet like they're the ones that persecute Christians and all other religious minorities in the country in the Middle
Yeah, I
East.
mean,
Yeah.
Arabs are 26% something like that of Israel.
Mhm.
They don't have a say in the government. That's inherently a-democratic, but that's the only way it can function.
Yeah.
The only way it can function is
Well,
by being a-democratic.
well, Syria, like literally, like they were the ones defending Christians against
Yes.
ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I should say their names out loud on YouTube. So,
Just
uh,
I think they're
yeah,
still verboten because nobody's gotten to like removing. But
yeah.
yeah, people tend to forget that Bashar al-Assad, very crud. What's the word for um not having religion in government?
Secular.
Secular, that's the word. Yeah,
Yeah.
very secular. Same with
Mhm.
Saddam. I mean, Saddam was very
Mhm.
secular, and he pretty much held that place together against like religious sectarian violence. People
Yeah.
tend to forget that Iraq is like 76% Shia, not Sunni, and the only way
Mhm.
he was able to hold it together was by preventing said sectarian violence.
Yes.
I digress. Back to the topic.
The Israeli government, like, they're only nice to, I guess, the American Protestant Christians. That's the only group of Christians that they tolerate.
When they're
Uh,
not calling them trash,
mhm.
because they
Yeah,
call them trash a lot.
yeah. Well, like, well, because when Israeli politicians, when they're here in America, they talk
Oh
about
yeah,
Christianity being the best religion in the
our
world.
best, our best friends. We
Yes.
love you
So
guys.
yes, yes, we share the same heritage, right? Jesus was a Jew, and
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's the only argument they have,
most
right?
definitely. That's very interesting. You bring that up because it's almost a sort of like I can't I cannot believe that I'm saying this, but it's a sort of very bad. Actually, I'm trying to think of the right way to word it. It's a very racist in a stupid way. They don't because they see a foreign culture. I mean, I've been called a papist by Southerners several times.
Well, because you
Um,
are.
I am, yeah, but that's beyond the point. These Southern Protestants, and just because one is a Southern Protestant doesn't mean one lives in the South. Southern Protestants are all over. They're a particular culture. They're called that because they originate in the South.
Mhm.
But they're incredibly racist against anything that's not Southern Protestant American
Mhm.
or Israel.
Well, it kind of sounds like the King James only type of Protestants.
Oh yeah, so
Yes.
yes,
Well,
that's
actually, a lot of
exactly
them
the
are like
sola
a lot
scriptura.
of the Protestant simps for Israel are basically a lot of them are King James onlyists too.
Yes,
So
yeah, they
yeah.
believe in the sola scriptura, King James only. I've seen some very
Mm.
strange takes from them. Some I've seen actually seen some Protestants say that Christ is beholden to the King James Bible, which is like,
Oh wow.
yeah, it's like
Mm.
what? I'm sorry, what? They're
Well,
book
well,
worship.
well, the original King James Bible also had the so-called Apocrypha. It's called the Deuterocanon. Properly, it's the Deuterocanon, and the King
Hmm.
James Bible had Deuterocanon. It had like seven more books in there. until like I don't know, the 1700s, 1800s, when the Protestants got rid of those books.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, the Protestants, they declared, those books to be apocrypha. Like, I think the German Bible did not even have the apocryphal books, and the King James
I
Bible,
don't.
the King James Bible, like had them, but they had like a different section for them. Um,
Hmm.
and actually, just one second, like I actually do have the original 1611 right here.
Oh.
So now, when I say original 1611, I'm not talking about the
Mhm.
1725 edition or the 1800 edition, whatever, right? This is the actual 1611 edition, and this Bible, this version actually has the Apocrypha in it, right?
Hmm.
So that's why, like, this KJV that I have, like when I tell the King James onlyists that they don't have the 1611, they say, "Oh yes, we do. We have the 1611." I tell them, "You do not,
Mhm.
because this is the 1611. This has all the books. You guys don't
Mhm.
have all the books." And I tell them, so
What?
my King James is actually based. Your King James is not. Yeah, but yes, but
I
the King James Bible itself is not the best English translation, and it's not the first English
no.
translation. You have the Dewey Reams, the
Yep.
Roman Catholics. They translated the Bible to English first, but then you had a Protestant king who wanted his own version, his own authorized King James version. Like, I like to mention John Hagee. He's a famous Protestant preacher from the South. He's your typical really fat Southern preacher. Like, this guy, like his neck
Mhm.
and his cheeks are like one and the same. Like, he's the guy who actually turned me into a neocon when I was a teenager.
Really?
Yeah. And so, that's why, as a former Protestant, as a former Protestant, that's why, like, I understand all the tricks and the
Mhm.
excuses that Protestants use to support Israel. You heard of the freedom fries, right? Well,
I'm aware. I
yeah.
know. I know
Well,
about it.
I remember when he was preaching, he goes, "I no longer call French fries anymore because of France's cowardice, because France condemned the war in Iraq originally." And so he says during his sermon, "I condemn France's I condemn France for not supporting us, and I no longer call French fries French fries. I call them freedom fries." And I would sometimes, inspired by John Hagee, if I would order some French fries, I would not say French fries. I would say freedom fries.
Oh, good
And
Lord.
and luckily, the people working at the fast food place always knew what I was talking about.
Do you not call them frankfurters or hamburgers too?
Hmm?
Do you not call them? Are you familiar with that?
Oh, hamburgers?
Yeah, in the World Wars, frankfurters, hot dogs, and hamburgers stopped being called frankfurters and hamburgers. They were called like it was something really dumb. It was like a freedom sandwich or something.
Oh yeah,
It was the same thing that they did with the French fries. They're not. Yeah.
free dumb, free dumb, free dumb. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They do that to everyone who the government does that to everyone who disagrees. And this has happened like 5 times or something like that.
yeah. So,
I've never heard of this guy before.
and you heard of John Hagee? Well, he's the
No.
guy who, like, he's one of the many reasons why so many American Protestants are pro-Israel.
Oh, okay,
So,
gotcha.
yeah, John Hagee, if you have time, look him up. He's so cringe. He's so boomer cringe, and
Uh,
and he talks with a
okay.
southern accent. So he makes Christianity sound worse than what it should be.
He's the cartoonish guy.
Huh?
He's the cartoonish guy, right?
What do you mean?
He looks like a cartoon stereotype,
I don't
and he
I,
talks and sounds like one, right?
I don't know, but like he's got like a deep southern accent, and
Okay,
like
if I actually think I know who you're
yeah,
talking
but
about
he's got
now.
like literally like his cheeks and his neck are like one.
Yeah,
He's
I think I
super.
know who you're talking about now
Yeah.
because every time I would see him, I would be like, "This has to be a comedy skit." Like this isn't not a comedy skit.
Yeah, well, you should definitely look him up. He's one of the reasons why so many Protestants in America are pro-Israel, and
Hmm,
uh, he's one of the reasons why so many people became neocons too.
hmm,
Like,
interesting.
yeah, and so that's why, like, it's because of his unbiblical or unchristian methods, his deception of Christians, is why
Mhm.
so many Protestants, support Israel to this very day.
I mean, to be fair, it's not just Protestants. It is a lot of it is baby boomers because my family is Catholic, and they had like a neocon phase of like anything that's good for Israel is good for America, and they were Catholic.
Yeah.
Um, but also they're not like the base. They back then they weren't like the base Catholic. They're just pretty irreligious. But now, sorry, I just turned a light on. Now we're kind of like a rope the Pope kind of Catholic.
Hmm. Oh,
I hate the Pope. I hate the current Pope so much.
well, my advice for you is to become Orthodox.
Um,
Yes,
I'm
and you're baptized as a child, I assume?
yeah, uh-huh.
Okay, yeah, so it'll be easier for you to, like, I don't think you'd have to be baptized. Like, I think
I will entertain
you'll
the
just get
idea.
chrismated.
I will entertain the idea.
Yeah,
Okay,
yes, you're welcome. You're welcome.
because you're like the seventh dude that is telling me to do that. That's like,
Yeah,
ugh.
yeah,
I hate that
yeah,
you guys are saying what's right. I hate that you're right,
yes.
but I'll just admit that you are.
Yeah, but anyways, let's keep dunking on Protestants for the
Yeah.
moment.
Um,
Yeah.
what else? Oh my God. Southern Protestants. Have you seen they're doing it's the same one that was like, you don't have to do anything to be a better person. Same one that had the AI generated sermon.
Hmm.
They were doing like Star Wars themed
Okay. Yes. Yes.
sermon.
I did
Yeah,
not see. I did not see Star Wars, but I did see the Buzz
they did
Lightyear.
Jurassic Park one too.
Oh wow.
Like the whole sermon is like they have a dude dressed as a Jedi going up and giving a sermon, and it's like, oh, if I
S-
were in that sect, I would kill myself.
Sir, if you're trying to be a priest, should always join the church. You don't have to dress up like a Jedi. Just become a priest. If you want to wear long robes, you could always become a priest. You don't have to.
Oh,
You don't have to LARP as Obi-Wan Kenobi here.
that's weird. It's such a weird culture.
Yeah.
To be yeah, it's like I just can't really
Yeah.
put it into a sentence. It's such a
Well,
weird culture.
like Protestantism is one of the reasons why American culture is dying out too. Like
Hmm.
well, the Christian culture that's in this country, it's dying out because of Protestantism and democracy.
Hmm. Especially with the whole like me
Hmm.
Protestantism being about
Yeah.
me.
Well,
A
like
lot of
the only base Protestant form of government that existed uh, is basically a Protestant monarchy. I'm not talking about the cringe constitutional monarchy of England. I'm talking about, like uh the German Empire from the 1800s, early
like the
1900s, right?
Lutheran
That
Lutherans can be
like that was the
yeah,
last kind of like based Protestant government, right?
yep,
But even that was subject to secularization anyway, because
yeah,
Protestantism, it's constantly progressing, it's constantly protesting, it's no longer stable.
yeah. And that's something that a lot of like I'm trad Protestants don't understand. The entire concept of Protestantism is counter traditional. They
Hmm.
don't want to accept that. The entire concept, its very identity, its theological basis is counter traditionalism. You cannot have a traditional religion that is counter traditional. It just
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. That's
Yeah.
like it's like the Trotskyism of religion in many ways.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, yeah. I don't know where I was going to go with that. I feel
Yeah.
like I was.
Well, like I guess I guess no, I would call it the Stalinism of religion, of Christianity, of Protestantism, because basically you had a Trotskyism, which I think is real communism, right?
Hmm.
And so Stalinism, because Stalin did a lot of evil things, but also some base things, right? So therefore, I would say Stalinism is actually the fake communism, right? And so Lutherans, despite them being traditional, and Presbyterians, they're trying to
Yeah.
kind of put on the vestments and try to look priestly. I would say, yeah, they're kind of more like the Stalin in that, they're the Stalinists in that regard, and the non-denominationals, the Baptists, they're the Trotskyites. They're the real
Oh,
Protestants.
okay.
They're
Yeah.
constantly evolving.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
yeah,
That actually, I was a little confused what you meant when you said that, but
yeah,
when you explain it, I kind of get it.
yeah.
Because you're right. They're always changing. They're always changing,
Hmm.
and that's not like there's always going to be room for change. Change is a natural thing. Change is in nature. It happens. But when you're always constantly changing just to be appealing, nobody's going to like you.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this: that the Orthodox Church has not changed since the 9th century.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, but I get what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
basically, times change, but what you're trying to say is that we still don't compromise our faith or
Yeah.
traditions. Like, what's
Things
interesting is that
change
people,
and evolution are
yeah,
separate.
well, people make this false assumption that if technology changes, your beliefs should change, which is kind of retarded. But yeah, so technology does not mean that you have to change your beliefs. Like, for some reason, if you notice that the more technology evolved, the more progressive people have become, like more secular. And like what people don't realize is that it was actually a lot of religious people who gave you this technology.
Hmm.
And it's like when Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet cosmonaut, when he went to outer space, people don't notice he was actually secretly an Orthodox Christian. People don't
Hmm.
notice. So there's a quote falsely attributed to him where he says, "Oh, I went to outer space and I did not see God," but he never said that. It was Nikita Khrushchev, the atheistical leader of the Soviet Union at the time. He's the one who
Hmm.
said that. He told that in front of a bunch of journalists. He said, "Oh,
Interesting.
he went to outer space and he did not see God up there, right?"
Hmm.
And and Nikita Khrushchev said, "Oh, we will show the last religious person on television," well, which is not true. For some reason, the religious people actually started to grow more in number than
Hmm.
and so he was implying, he's using the word television to imply that technology, like atheistical technology is so wonderful, secular technology. You don't need
Yeah.
God anymore. Humanity, like we're the gods, right? And so therefore, we don't need God anymore. We have technology. And what's interesting is that Protestantism, it's like we no longer need church history. We no longer need tradition. We need the word of
Hmm.
God only. Well, when you start saying all you need is the word of God, eventually 2 generations later, the word of God will no longer be needed either. Is you just need church for what? Just for fellowship, just to have some coffee with some people. Is that church for you? No. Like, church is about praising
So it's
God.
about me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's just about them, right? And this is what it all
Yeah.
leads to, right? So the more progressive things are, the more progressive Protestantism becomes, right? It no longer,
Absolutely.
yeah, pretty soon, there will be more Protestants that will start supporting abortion. Like, if things keep if things keep going the way they are going now, let's just say there are no significant changes in this country. Well, eventually the number of Protestants supporting abortion will probably go up. And
Absolutely. And
yeah,
we've already seen Protestants go they're friendly with I don't even know what the term is.
the rainbow
Dudes who
flags.
like dudes, chicks
Who?
who like chicks,
Oh
chicks
yeah,
who like chicks, and dudes who like dudes. I don't
yeah,
even know what they
yeah,
call
yeah,
it anymore.
yeah.
I
Like
use
the
a different
rainbow
word in
people,
my
rainbow people.
yeah, I use a different word in my private life, and I'll just leave it at that. But they're
Yeah.
already pro that, and like this bad take is not a new thing, mind you. I love that you brought up how they completely dismiss theological history, church fathers, and things like that, because you often hear, oh, where did Protestantism come from? Well, you see the printing press, and then they were able to print Bibles
Okay.
in different languages. That's like the commonly accepted origin. The printing press made it to where normal people could get their own Bibles, and then they could read it and come to their own conclusions. It's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because Christianity's about you, right? It's
Yeah.
always been about
So
you.
so basically the evolution of technology back then already kickstarted Protestantism, you could say.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much, which is exactly why we should destroy technology and return to monkey.
Return to monkey. Yeah. Or we could just return to the Roman Empire, you know.
I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly fine with
Yeah.
that. I know
Like
Uncle said
well
R.I.P. By
well
the
when I
way.
say when I say Roman Empire, I'm talking about, you know, Constantine the Great. Like the
Uncle
first,
Ted had a theory about
yeah.
if we brought everything back to like a pre-industrial Renaissance era
Hmm.
and we kept it at that using theology. He actually believed in a kind of like theological
Hmm.
anti-technologism, if that's even a word. That would fix like 90% of the problems in the world.
Well, like so the problem with Uncle Ted is that like he did not like realize that like he did not go far enough in his mind about like why technology is bad. Like he did not like become, I guess, a Christian, right? He did not become like part of the
Mhm.
church. Like how do you realize that like a lot of his plans would have more value, that there'd be more sense, more purpose to a lot of his ideas had he been a Christian, right? Because
Well,
like
I think,
yeah.
yeah, it's probably because his background as a mathematician. Um, he was not very religious as a person. He was in many ways the archetypal reactionary. He was not religious. He didn't have religious views. His entire take was reactionary to things he didn't like. He even says it in I can't remember what it was. It wasn't his thesis, but he says, at the end of the day, I just hated the image of machines tearing up the forests. He was a
Mhm.
completely reactionary person.
Yeah. Basically, Protestantism kind of, in a way, give birth to like modern capitalism too,
Oh,
and
absolutely. Absolutely.
capitalism has created this evil technological monstrosity that, you know, Uncle
Mhm.
Ted did not like, and
Yeah,
so Protestantism is basically this anti-Christian Christianity.
it is. And I often refer to Protestantism as Satanism without Satan,
Ooh, interesting.
uh, because it is, and it's an unmathematic, untheological way. But if you ask someone, what do they believe in,
Hmm.
right? I'll just ask you, what do you believe in? What's your whole thing with religion?
I'm an Orthodox Christian.
Yes. Why are you an Orthodox Christian? Why do you praise God?
Well, one, I believe in God, and two, the Orthodox Church is the only true church because, based on history, you can see that it is the original church. Okay,
There you go. You talk about history, you talk
yeah.
about God, and you talk about belief. If you ask a Protestant why they are Protestant or what they believe in,
Hmm.
you will get me. It's about me. It's about my
Okay.
relationship to God. It's about me, how I
Hmm.
feel. You will hear me more than God. Same,
So what's
same with
interesting? So what you're trying to say is that the community churches that they create are not really that community.
no. They are, and it's the same thing where if you go into a Protestant church, I know some are better than others, but the non-denomination ones are terrible with this. Where are the crosses? Surely, if you're so Christian, there would be a cross in your church, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's no crosses. Why would there be no crosses in a Christian church? Makes you wonder. It's almost like they're averse to that. And then they'll start talking to you about, no, that's idolatry. You can't have a symbol of God in the house of God. That's idolatry.
Hmm.
So it's very strange how they're so
Yeah.
averse to symbols of God. They talk about
Hmm.
me, 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 me. It's all about them. It's all about what makes them happy, their joy, their pleasure. And they're terrified of symbols of God.
Hmm.
So I would go so far as to say that they are satanic without Satan in a sense. And that's not going to
Hmm.
last long. I feel that within the next 20 years, you will have a new permutation of this creature.
Hmm. Well, um, like you already have like Joel Osteen, for example. You mentioned him earlier.
Mhm.
Joel Osteen, like basically you go to his, well, not go to church. You could just watch his church sermons, and I don't remember seeing any crosses in his,
Mm-mm.
like on his stage or anything like that. And it's always about what's interesting. It's always about like motivational speaking.
Yeah.
It's always about like, hey, like you could do this, you could do that. Let me quote you a Bible verse. And I'm thinking I could literally say the same thing without quoting the Bible. I could literally just talk to a friend of mine and be like, "Hey, bro, you got this," you know,
Mhm.
that's all it is. It's just basic motivational speaking. And I remember, uh, so this is many years ago. I was visiting a Hillsong chapter in Ukraine, in Kiev, in Kiev. And what's interesting, I did not go to the mainstream to the main campus of Hillsong in Kiev. I went to like this like smaller campus that they were building, right?
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that like because I was super Protestant, right? And I still remained Protestant after that experience, but still like I was thinking, oh, Hillsong, like I like them, I like their music, right? I like some of their stuff, right? But then like I went into their service, right? And they had a German speaker, but um but the translator did not speak German. The translator knew English. So the German preacher, he also knew English, right?
Okay.
And so basically, and the translator, like so he would translate into Russian to the audience, right?
Hmm.
And the preacher and me, I know English and Russian, so like like half the time I'm listening to the translator, like trying to judge his translation, right?
Yeah.
And it was okay, right? But anyways, but like I'm trying to like listen to this preacher, to this German preacher, and I'm thinking, but I'm not feeling anything anymore. Like I'm not feeling anything. Like it's like an
Hmm.
emptiness. Like it felt like some like he's trying to motivate, and I'm like thinking, okay, well, like inside, like I'm not feeling anything. And what's interesting, when he started to pray, so they're doing this prayer at the end of the sermon, and the German guy, like he's like his eyes are closed and he's smiling and he's saying, Lord, I want to thank you for this, this, and that. And then he says, and God, thank you for my wife because she's so hot. And that, like, and it's funny now, but
That's
at that moment, I was like, what are you doing, dude? You know, where's the reverence? You know,
hmm.
where's,
Even the prayers are different.
yeah,
How does an
yeah.
Orthodox pray? How does a Catholic pray? In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, God. How does a
Well,
Protestant pray?
well, like there's
Talk to
veneration.
Jesus like
Yes.
he's your friend. God
Yeah.
is your friend. It's
Yeah.
about you. He's your
Yeah.
friend. Talk to God. It's like, no, God is not my friend.
He's your
He's my
father.
father. Yes, he's my
Yes.
father. I'm not going to talk
Yes.
to God like my friends because I say vulgar, terrible, foul things with my friends. I'm going to talk to God with reverence and respect because I
Yes.
don't want a lightning bolt to hit me.
Well, the thing is, like that preacher just triggered me inside. I'm like, what is this, right? And so, like already, like I was still Protestant. I was still like a coping Protestant at that moment. So I kind of just like said,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, Hillsong, I don't consider them Protestant anymore. They suck, right? And like I was searching for
Yeah.
this. I was like, where's this veneration? But there's no more veneration of God anymore, right? And yeah, and then
Yeah.
like and then when we first met like many years ago, like I was still a Protestant, and you know I was still trying to promote like a Protestant monarchy. right?
Yeah. I
And
think I remember that
yeah,
I was like, oh, cool, cool, a
yeah, like
Russian. Wait, a Protestant Russian? This is so weird.
yes, yes, exactly. Well, I remember when we first met, like I was still a Protestant, but I was trying to cope hard with traditionalism, with with political traditionalism and Protestantism,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And like every time some Roman Catholic person would try to tell me, "Oh, well, this doesn't make sense, though. If you're a Protestant, why are you monarchist, right?" And I would try to bring up Germany, for example, and
Hmm.
and maybe England, but I hate constitutional monarchies, right? But I was constantly coping, right? And what's interesting is that when I became Orthodox, right, my veneration, like for my reverence for God made sense. Like I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, now it makes sense actually, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, like a lot of my traditionalism started to make sense. Like
Mm.
I no longer had to cope as Protestant. I no longer had to be a fan of traditionalism while staying a Protestant and trying to kind of say,
Yeah.
well, see, I'm a real Protestant because I'm conservative Protestant, not a liberal
Yeah.
Protestant, right?
And there's
And
a ton of that in Protestantism. That's
yeah,
not, no, no, that's not real Protestantism. That's
yes,
Durka Herka Merka.
yeah.
This is real Protestantism. But then when you start to deal with one of the few real, like, sanctioned sects of Christianity, then it's like, oh, no, I don't need to say that. I don't need to deal with that nonsense because we have, these are the requirements, you know? If you meet the requirements, you are in fact Orthodox or Catholic or whatever.
Well, the thing is, like when you're a Protestant, you got to keep coping all the time, right? Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
supporting Protestantism, and so when I became Orthodox, I like a lot of things made sense to me. And for example, like if since I'm Orthodox now, and like whenever some conservative Protestant, or whenever he has to say, "Oh, these liberal Protestants, they're like not real Protestants," and I'm thinking, wait a minute, who are you to judge? I'm thinking you're
Mm-hmm.
Protestant, right? You guys believe in sola scriptura. That liberal Protestant you're making fun of, well, guess what? He's living by sola scriptura. He's going by their
Yeah,
methods.
yeah,
So who are you to try to tell that liberal Protestant he's wrong? He's not a real Protestant, or he's not a real
yes.
Christian, because according to Protestantism, sola scriptura, you interpret the Bible the way you feel like. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they'll say that's not what it means, like it means the Bible alone, but no, but that's what it led to.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
they'll say that
yes.
that's not what it means until then it's convenient for them to say, actually, that is what it means.
Mhm. Yes. So whenever a Protestant tries to debate other Protestants, I'm thinking, what is the point of you debating other Protestants? Like, it makes no sense to
Who's
me
less
because
traditional? Who's more damning to the
what's
church, I
interesting,
guess.
whenever a Protestant, like let's say a conservative Protestant, whenever they have like no actual argument anymore, they would say, well, as long as we all love Jesus. And then I'm wondering, well, wait a minute, are you sure about that? Because it, if a Roman Catholic came up to you, you would not use that. You would not say that to them. Oh, as long as we love Jesus. Or if a
Mm-hmm.
liberal Protestant came up to you, you would not say, oh, as long as we love Jesus. No, you still understand that there's, that you still understand that, that there has to be some sort of structure, right? Some sort of
Yeah.
tradition, right?
Yep.
But your Protestantism does not uphold the traditions because your Protestantism is constantly evolving. There's so many schisms within Protestantism. Like, for example, you could literally, right now, you and I could literally read a couple Bible verses, based on those Bible verses, create a denomination.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we would apply for the 501(c)(3 thing, be tax exempt, right? Boom, we started a church.
And then we have a disagreement, and then I move to the other side of the strip mall, and that's another sect.
Exactly. Right. But like so the major Protestant cope is, well, at the end of the day, as long as you love Jesus, we're all going to heaven. So I'm thinking, so why are you even debating with other Protestants, with your fellow
Mm-hmm.
Protestants? Like,
Yeah.
why does it matter? Like, whenever I see Calvinists and Arminians argue with each other, I'm thinking, does it really matter? Because as long as you both love Jesus, right? Like you both go to heaven, you both believe in Jesus. Well, does this
Mm-hmm.
debate really matter? Especially if you're a Calvinist, does debating really matter at that point? You know?
I mean, it's it does matter to them because it's not about Christ. It's about them.
It's about
That's
boosting their ego.
exactly. It's the church of self. That's what Protestantism is. It's the church of self.
Yes, and like people like James White and other Protestant scholars, it's all about praising themselves. They want to show us how scholarly they are. Like whenever they argue with the Orthodox or Papists, sorry, Roman Catholics,
None
like
taken.
it's all about his own personal ego. He wants to show how we Protestants, we're also smart. We Protestants, we're scholarly. We read books. We read books too. We respect some church fathers. Yeah.
I
and,
saw from the
it's
Sunflower Society a post about exactly that, and I think it was the same guy too.
mm,
Is that Protestants care far more when they do care about theology, they care about the triviality of it. Oh, you don't
mm,
know this church father. Well, I know about this church father. Oh, you
mm,
can't quote me James 3:70,
mm,
3:17, whatever. I know James 3:17. I'm more pious than you.
yeah.
They care about the triviality, not
Yeah.
actually acting Christ-like, though.
Or
That's the thing.
they'll quote like I don't know, like John 14:4 or whatever. I'm making this up right now, but
Yeah,
they'll quote John 14:4 to counteract your James 3:17, whatever you say.
yeah,
Yeah.
and to them it becomes like, for lack of a better term, it becomes like a Pokemon game for them. Oh, you played this quote, I played this quote. Ah, see, I'm smarter than you. There's no
Hmm.
Christ-like nature in it. It's very vain and prideful,
Yeah.
which is rich coming
Well,
from
like
me.
for example, on social media, let's say I make a controversial post in a Protestant group, right? And so at first, Protestants will be united against me. They'll be like,
Yeah,
"Oh, this, and this," but then you have the reply button, right, where you could add, or try to argue with someone, right? And so
yeah.
like someone will say, well, like I get your point here, but I think you're not truly understanding this quote right here, and I would rather use this quote, and then they start arguing within each other with each other, So first they'll unite
Yeah,
against me, against like my general theology, but then they'll start quote mining against each other. They'll start cherry picking the Bible, and they'll eventually they'll start arguing with each other.
yeah. How to
Yeah.
defeat an invasion of Protestants? You
Hmm.
close the gate, and then you throw a Bible out at them, and they'll
Yeah.
all start fighting each other over what it means.
Yeah.
And by the morning, most of them are dead, and you
Yeah.
can run them off from your castle.
See, well, like for example, when we Orthodox, like when we laity, right, just regular people, like we're not even priests,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like when we argue with each other, right, it's all within the confines of the church, right?
Hmm.
And like as long as we're not directly saying anything heretical, right? Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we say, you know what, consult your own priest, your priest
Yeah.
knows,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
uh,
is very
yeah,
funny that the sects that are not about you, it's not about me, are always the ones where the priest is like, it's go to your priest, find it out on yourself.
it's not just about reading on your own. It's also kind of like reading the church fathers, reading the
Yeah.
church canons, because the church fathers, the early church fathers, they knew the apostles
Mhm.
personally. Some of the church fathers even
Absolutely.
knew Jesus. Like some of them actually knew
Mhm.
Jesus, right? And so I believe I forgot. Oh, Saint Ignatius of Antioch.
Mhm.
I believe he was one of the children that was actually with Christ. And when Christ said, do not forbid the children from coming unto me," right? And I
Oh,
believe,
really?
Saint Ignatius was one of those kids that was listening to that. That was part of that. And
Wow.
yeah, and then Saint Ignatius, he was a student of Saint John.
Yeah.
And so Saint John, the apostle, the youngest apostle, um, he has his own students. His own students got their information from him. Where did he get his information from? Jesus Christ. Right? And so
Yeah.
like this information gets carried on and gets written down, right? Not immediately, not everything's written down too. Like well, let's not be Protestants here. Not everything's written down, right? There's oral tradition and so forth. But like Saint Ignatius, he wrote, and like some of his stuff, like it sounds, oh, this sounds Catholic, this sounds Orthodox. Well, it's because the church, because the church was not Protestant back then, right?
Yeah.
Like Saint Ignatius, he would talk about respecting your bishops, How many Protestants have respect for their bishops?
None at all, because they don't
Yeah.
even have.
Well,
It's
like for them, bishop is like the pastor.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they'll have this mad cope about like, well, yeah, but like we're actually the true Christianity, even though we have no lineage to Christ, even
Yeah.
though there were,
Well,
1,500 years of us not existing, and then we popped up. We're actually, it's like, get out of here. The comedy club is down the road, buddy.
have you heard of the Trail of Blood Baptists?
Oh God, this sounds awful. I have not heard of them.
So basically, what's interesting, before I even heard of this theory, I heard of this theory when I became Orthodox. But what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting is that I already had this theory in my mind before while I was a Protestant, right?
Uh-huh.
And so basically, so the Trail of Blood Baptists, they believe that like the church was always kind of like Protestant in its style and its form, in its early form. And then the evil Constantine shows up. You're glitching there.
I'm twitching from this already.
Yeah. So basically, Constantine shows up and establishes the Catholic Church, which is not true, right? But anyways, that's what they believe. And so Constantine shows up, ruins Christianity, creates a Catholic Church, right? And then the real Christians end up being persecuted by Constantine. And then like these real Christians, they kind of devolve to tiny, tiny little sects that kind of become unheard of, and they kind of gather in secrets. And if you study the Middle Ages, there were like proto-Protestant groups that existed. Yeah, the
Oh yeah, there
Waldensians,
were always but
the
I will say,
Albigenses.
yeah, I will say, and this is a whole topic for
Yeah.
another day. The proto Protestants, they're not Christians. They are like a return of Druidic religious practice with a Christian veneer. That's one of
Mhm.
the reasons why the places that the Roman Empire, this is just my theory, but the places that the Roman Empire never conquered all ended up being Protestant, right? England never fully conquered, Germany never fully conquered, the Northlands never fully conquered by the Romans. They ended up being
Well,
Protestant.
like southern Germany was Roman.
Southern Germany was Roman, but that's
Yeah.
also Catholic.
Yeah. Interesting.
That's a whole
Yeah.
discussion for another day. Sorry, carry on.
To be fair, the Slavs were not conquered by
The
the Romans,
Slavs were
and
not conquered by the Romans, but
yeah.
technically they were religiously by the Eastern Church. They submitted to the Eastern
Well,
Church.
yeah, but not by force. So
Not by,
yeah,
yes, they submitted. It was a
yeah.
religious
But
submission.
anyways, but going back to the Trail of
Different
Blood, right?
conversation.
So
Yes.
so basically the Protest so basically the Albigenses, Waldenses, they exist in the Middle Ages, and what's interesting is that like a lot of the stuff that the Waldensians and the Albigenses preached, they have no connection with modern day Protestantism, right? They were still kind of semi-Catholic in their own way, right? But
Yeah.
according to Trail of Blood Baptists, oh, we draw our lineage to these little groups and sects that popped out of nowhere in Europe, and the church always killed them. And no, like first of all, they were all heretics, right?
Yeah.
And second of all, like the Waldensians, they themselves will not respect your modern day Protestant church anyway, right? Like they would definitely be like, no, we have nothing to do with you, right? Even Luther himself would now look at modern churches and be like, oh wow, like yeah, like, what have
Oh
I done?
heavens, no. He wrote
What have I done? That's a huge thing.
I know there's a very famous treatise from oh dear, there we are, from Martin Luther on the something. I'm not going to say the word,
Okay,
but
I know what book you're
many
talking about.
people
Yes,
know. Yeah, many people know
yeah.
about it, and that would piss. Like if you mentioned that to a modern American Protestant, that the founder of Protestantism had a particular view of those people,
Hmm.
they would not be happy
Yeah,
about it. The
yeah,
lineage of Protestantism is incredibly schizophrenic, if it
yes.
even has a
Well,
lineage.
it has no true lineage, but the Trail of Blood Baptists, they say, and then eventually Martin Luther shows up and kind of gives more freedom, more fresh air to these sects,
Mm-hmm.
right? If Protestants do try to make a connection to like any ancient church lineage, then the Trail of Blood Baptists, like that's like that's like their version of history. And when I was a
Yeah,
Protestant, I kind of thought the same way. I thought there were still some tiny groups out there, and I thought the Waldenses were one of the early groups, the proto-Protestants. But yeah, but it's all nonsense. So, and it
it
looks like we're running out of time here. So yeah, so basically, we just proven that the Protestants are cringe and they're simps
I
for a for Israel, who's not really our ally. So yeah.
no. Well, that was good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
All right.
Wrap it up
Okay, guys. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe,
and
the
pray. Pray.
pray, and also go to the merch channel, support the channel. So buy the merch. The link will be in the description. So check it out.
Yeah,
And
get one of the
God
pistols
bless you
magnets.
guys.
God bless.